The large ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco glowed with soft golden light. It was the night of the annual San Francisco Legal Foundation Charity Gala. Men in black tuxedos and women in colorful evening gowns filled the room. The sound of gentle music mixed with the buzz of many conversations. Judge Edward Chen stood near the bar, holding his fourth glass of champagne. He was 62 years old with gray hair and tired eyes behind his glasses. Most people knew him as a quiet, serious judge who rarely showed emotion in his courtroom. Tonight was different. The alcohol had made his cheeks red and his thoughts fuzzy. "Another drink, Your Honor?" asked the bartender with a polite smile. "Yes, please," Chen said, his words slightly slurred. He looked around the room while waiting for his drink. The gala had attracted many important people from the city: lawyers, judges, business leaders, and even some celebrities. Chen's eyes stopped on a tall figure standing across the room. It was Clint Eastwood, the famous actor and director. Eastwood was 89 years old but still stood straight and proud. His face was deeply lined from age, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He wore a simple black tuxedo and was talking to a small group of people who were clearly thrilled to be near him. The bartender handed Chen his fifth glass of champagne. "Here you go, sir." Chen took a big sip and kept staring at Eastwood. He had never met the actor in person, but he had strong feelings about him. Chen considered himself very liberal in his politics, and he knew Eastwood was not. For years, Chen had watched Eastwood's movies and interviews with growing dislike. The alcohol in his system was now turning that dislike into anger. I know he's getting an award tonight," said a woman's voice beside him. Chen turned to see Linda Park, another judge from his courthouse. She was looking in Eastwood's direction too. "What award?" Chen asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "The Lifetime Philanthropy Award. Apparently, he's donated millions to the Legal Foundation over the years," Linda explained. "I didn't know you were interested in him." "I'm not," Chen said quickly. "I just don't understand why everyone treats him like he's some kind of hero." Linda raised her eyebrows. "Well, many people admire his work, and his donations have helped fund legal aid for thousands of people who couldn't afford it." Chen took another large sip of champagne. "His movies glorify violence, and his politics are from the Stone Age." Linda looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we should talk about something else, Edward. How's your wife doing? I heard she was traveling in Europe." But Chen wasn't listening anymore. The room seemed to be spinning slightly, and his focus had narrowed to the figure of Eastwood across the room. All the frustrations of his week, a difficult case, arguments with his clerk and his wife being away, seemed to center on the actor. In his alcohol-clouded mind, Eastwood represented everything Chen disliked about America. "Excuse me," he said to Linda, putting down his empty glass. "I need to say hello to someone." Linda looked worried. "Edward, maybe you should sit down for a bit. Have some water." "I'm fine," he insisted and began walking across the ballroom. People moved out of his way, some nodding respectfully at the judge. Chen walked with determination, though not in a completely straight line. As he got closer, he could hear Eastwood's famous raspy voice telling a story to the small circle around him. "So I told the studio head, either the script stays as it is or I walk. And that was that," Eastwood was saying. The people around him laughed appreciatively. Chen stopped just outside the circle watching. A tall, serious-looking man in a dark suit, obviously security, gave Chen a quick look, but didn't stop him. After all, Chen was a federal judge, not a threat. Eastwood finished his story and took a sip from his glass, which appeared to contain plain water. Someone in the group asked him about his next film project. "Well, I'm reading scripts, but at my age I have to be choosy," Eastwood answered with a small smile. "I don't have time to waste on stories that don't matter." Something about this comment pushed Chen over the edge. He stepped forward into the circle, causing several people to look at him in surprise. "Judge Chen," said a lawyer Chen recognized, "would you like to meet Mr. Eastwood?" But Chen ignored him and looked directly at Eastwood. "So you only tell stories that matter, is that it?" he asked loudly. The circle fell quiet. Eastwood turned to look at Chen, his famous squint becoming more pronounced. I try to, he said simply. That's interesting, Chen continued, his voice getting louder. Because I've seen your movies and most of them seem to be about men solving problems with guns. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The security man took a step closer but didn't interfere yet. Eastwood remained calm. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, Judge. This calm response only made Chen angrier. Don't patronize me, he said, pointing a finger at Eastwood. You've spent your career glorifying a vision of America that hurts people like me. The room around them was getting quieter as more people noticed the confrontation. Someone nearby started recording with their phone. People like you? Eastwood asked, his voice still even. Yes, Chen said, swaying slightly. Immigrants, minorities, anyone who doesn't fit your John Wayne fantasy of what America should be. A woman nearby gasped. The security man now moved to stand directly beside Eastwood, who held up a hand to indicate he was okay. Judge Chen, Eastwood said quietly, I think you've misunderstood my work and my views. But this isn't the place to discuss it. Of course it isn't, Chen said bitterly, because you don't want people to see behind the tough guy act. You're just an old man with old ideas that are dying out, thank God. And yet they're giving you an award tonight. By now, nearly half the ballroom had fallen silent and was watching them. Chen was too far gone in his anger and alcohol to notice, or care. You know what? Chen continued, his voice echoing in the increasingly quiet room. I've had to sit on the bench for years listening to both sides, being fair to everyone. But tonight I'm not on the bench. And I can tell you what I really think of you and your so-called contributions to society. Eastwood's face remained impassive, but his eyes had hardened. The security man whispered something in his ear, but Eastwood shook his head slightly. Your movies are simplistic garbage that cater to the lowest common denominator, Chen went on, his words becoming more slurred. Your political views are embarrassing. Remember that empty chair routine? That was pathetic. You're not a hero. You're a relic. The room was now completely silent, except for Chen's voice and the soft click of phone cameras. At the edges of the crowd, several people in suits were moving toward them, federal marshals who were providing security for the event. Eastwood finally spoke, his voice low but clear. Judge, I think you've had too much to drink. Why don't we continue this another time when you're feeling more yourself? Don't tell me what to do, Chen snapped. You're not the director here. You can't just... A hand touched Chen's shoulder firmly. He turned to see a tall woman in a dark suit with a Marshals badge visible on her belt. Judge Chen, she said quietly but firmly, I need to speak with you immediately. Please come with me. Chen blinked at her in confusion. I'm in the middle of something here. Sir, she insisted, her voice leaving no room for argument. It's urgent. Please come with me now. Another marshal appeared on Chen's other side. Something about their serious expressions cut through Chen's alcohol haze, making him realize this wasn't about his confrontation with Eastwood. What's going on? He asked, suddenly feeling soberer. Not here, sir, the female marshal said. Please, come with us. As they began to lead him away, Chen looked back at Eastwood, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. The crowd parted to let them through, phones still recording the unexpected drama. Chen had no idea that in just minutes, his life would change forever, and his public insult to Clint Eastwood would be the least of his problems. The federal marshals led Judge Chen through the crowded ballroom. People moved aside, whispering to each other as they passed. Chen felt his face grow hot with shame. Just moments ago he had been yelling at Clint Eastwood. Now he was being escorted out like a criminal. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Where are we going? Chen asked the female marshal, who held his arm firmly. Somewhere private, sir, she replied, without looking at him. Her voice was professional, but cold. They walked past the main doors of the ballroom and turned down a service hallway. The bright lights hurt Chen's eyes after the soft glow of the ballroom. The sounds of the party faded behind them. Chen noticed 3 more marshals waiting in the hallway. Their faces were serious. What is this about? Chen demanded, trying to sound like the powerful judge he was, but his words still slurred slightly from the champagne. The lead marshal, a tall man with short gray hair, stepped forward. "Judge Edward Chen, I'm Chief Deputy Marshal Robert Torres. We need to speak with you about a serious matter." Chen's stomach tightened with fear. "Is my wife okay? Has something happened to her?" "Your wife is fine, sir," Torres said. "This is about you. We received orders this evening to bring you in for questioning." "Questioning? About what?" Chen's mind raced through his recent cases, trying to think what could have caused this. Torres looked at the other marshals, then back at Chen. "Sir, earlier today, federal agents executed a search warrant on your chambers and home. Evidence was discovered that requires immediate action." Chen felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. "Search warrant? That's impossible. On what grounds?" "Judge Chen, we have reason to believe you accepted bribes in connection with the United States versus Next Gen Technologies case," Torres said, his voice flat and professional. Chen's mouth fell open. The Next Gen case had been a major antitrust lawsuit he had presided over last year. He had ruled in favor of the technology company, dismissing the government's case. It had been a controversial decision. "That's absurd," Chen shouted, his voice echoing in the narrow hallway. "I ruled based on the law and the evidence, nothing else." "Sir, we found $200,000 in cash in a safe in your chambers," Torres said, "and we have records of offshore account transfers that coincide with key dates in the Next Gen case." Chen felt the blood drain from his face. The room seemed to spin, and not just from the alcohol. "That's not possible," he whispered. "We also have recorded conversations between you and Michael Zhang, Next Gen's CEO, added the female marshal. Chen's mind flashed to private lunches he had with Zhang before and during the trial. They had been friends for years, long before the EI case. They had discussed many things, including the trial, though Chen had always been careful not to cross ethical lines, or so he thought. Those conversations were completely appropriate, Chen insisted. "Zhang is an old friend. We never discussed anything improper." "The recordings suggest otherwise, sir," Torres said. "I'm sorry, but we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of bribery, corruption, and obstruction of justice." Chen felt his knees weaken. "This is a mistake. A terrible mistake." "You have the right to remain silent," Torres began reading him his Miranda rights. Chen barely heard the words. His mind was spinning with panic and confusion. How could this be happening? After 20 years on the federal bench, his reputation was spotless. He had always prided himself on his integrity. "I need to call my lawyer," Chen said when Torres finished. "You'll be allowed to make that call when we reach the federal building," Torres assured him. One of the marshals produced handcuffs. "Are those really necessary?" Chen asked, staring at the metal cuffs in horror. Torres hesitated, then nodded. "I'm sorry, sir, but it's protocol." Chen held out his wrists, feeling utterly humiliated as the cold metal closed around them. He thought about the scene he had just caused with Eastwood, and now this. His career and reputation were crumbling before his eyes. "Can we at least leave through a back exit?" Chen asked quietly. "There are reporters at this event." Torres nodded. "We'll take the service elevator down to the parking garage." The group moved toward the elevator, Chen walking between four marshals. His mind was starting to clear from the shock, and he began to think more like the judge he was. "The timing of this is very suspicious," Chen said as they waited for the elevator. "Why execute the arrest in the middle of a public event? Why not at my home or chambers?" Torres didn't answer, but Chen saw discomfort flash across his face. "Someone wanted this to be public, didn't they?" Chen pressed. "Someone wanted to humiliate me." The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. As they descended to the parking garage, Chen's legal mind began working despite his fear. "Who signed the search warrant?" he asked. After a pause, Torres said, "Judge Hamilton." Chen's eyes widened. William Hamilton was a fellow federal judge and a close friend of NextGen's biggest competitor. The pieces were starting to fit together in his mind. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage. Two black SUVs with government plates waited nearby. As they approached the vehicles, Chen heard a commotion behind them. He turned to see several people rushing toward them, led by a woman in an evening gown. "Edward!" the woman called out. It was Linda Park, the judge who had been speaking with Chen at the bar earlier. "Ma'am, please stay back," one of the marshals warned, stepping between Linda and Chen. "What are you doing with him?" Linda demanded. "This is Judge Edward Chen. You can't just arrest a federal judge without explanation." "We have a valid warrant, Your Honor," Torres said, recognizing Linda as a judge. Linda looked at Chen's handcuffed wrists and pale face. "Edward, what's happening?" "They're saying I took bribes in the next Chen case," Chen said, his voice hollow. "They claim they found cash in my chambers and have recordings of me with Zhang." Linda's face showed shock, then determination. "That's ridiculous. I'm coming with you." "That's not possible, Judge Park," Torres said firmly. "Then I'm calling Judge Morris right now," Linda said, pulling out her phone. "He's the chief judge of our district and needs to know about this immediately." Chen felt a small spark of hope. Judge Morris was a fair man who wouldn't rush to judgment. "And I'm calling Barbara," Linda added, referring to Chen's wife. "She needs to contact your attorney." "Thank you, Linda," Chen said, his voice breaking slightly. As Linda made her calls, Chen was guided into the back seat of one of the SUVs. Through the window, he could see more people arriving in the garage. Some colleagues, some reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the arrest. The female marshal got into the back seat beside him. "We'll be at the federal building in about 10 minutes, sir." Chen nodded, trying to compose himself. As the SUV pulled away, he caught a glimpse of the hotel entrance. Standing there, watching silently, was Clint Eastwood. The actor's face was unreadable, but for a brief moment their eyes met. Chen felt a strange mix of shame and defiance. The SUV turned onto the street, and Eastwood disappeared from view. Chen closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Just 30 minutes ago, he had been enjoying a charity gala, about to watch Eastwood receive an award. Now he was in handcuffs, his career and freedom in jeopardy. The worst part was that he truly didn't know if he was innocent. The champagne was wearing off, and troubling memories were surfacing. Conversations with Zhang that might have crossed, lines, gifts he had accepted without much thought. Decisions in the case that he had convinced himself were legally sound, but might have been influenced by his friendship. "Judge Chen," the marshal beside him said quietly, "for what it's worth, I've worked with the courts for 15 years. Things aren't always what they seem at first. The truth has a way of coming out." Chen looked at her, surprised by the small kindness. "I hope you're right," he said, "because right now I'm not even sure what the truth is anymore." As the SUV made its way through the nighttime streets of San Francisco, Chen tried to prepare himself for what was coming. He would need all his legal knowledge, all his connections, and all his courage to face the storm ahead. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder if his public confrontation with Eastwood had been a strange twist of fate, the last free act of a man about to lose everything. The holding cell at the federal building was small and cold. Judge Chen sat on the metal bench, his suit jacket wrinkled and his bow tie undone. The handcuffs had been removed, but he still rubbed his wrists where they had left red marks. It had been 3 hours since the marshals had brought him in. 3 hours of waiting, a brief phone call to his lawyer, and a formal reading of the charges against him. The door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in. It was Martin Goldstein, one of the top defense attorneys in San Francisco, and an old friend of Chen's. "Edward," Goldstein said, placing his briefcase on the small table. "Sorry it took me so long. I was at a dinner in Napa." Chen stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you for coming, Martin." Goldstein looked Chen up and down. "You look terrible. Sit down before you fall down." Chen sat back on the bench while Goldstein took the only chair in the room. "I've reviewed the charges," Goldstein said, opening his briefcase. "Bribery, corruption, and obstruction of justice, all related to the next-gen technologies case." "It's ridiculous," Chen said, shaking his head. "I never took bribes from anyone." Goldstein pulled out some papers. "They're saying they found $200,000 in cash in a safe in your chambers." "What safe?" Chen asked, confused. "I don't have a safe in my chambers." Goldstein looked up sharply. "You don't have a safe?" "No, Never have. My chambers just have the standard furniture provided by the court. Goldstein made a note. That's interesting, very interesting. And these supposed recordings of me and Michael Zhang, Chen continued. We've been friends for years, long before he became CEO of Next Gen. Yes, we had lunch a few times during the trial, but we never discussed the case in any improper way. They claim to have recordings that suggest otherwise, Goldstein said carefully. Then, they're fake or taken out of context, Chen insisted. Goldstein studied Chen's face. Edward, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Not as a judge, not as a friend, but as my client. Did you ever discuss the case with Zhang in a way that could be interpreted as inappropriate? Chen started to deny it immediately, then paused. The events at the charity gala, the confrontation with Eastwood, and the shock of his arrest had sobered him up completely. He tried to remember every conversation he had with Zhang during the trial. We talked about technology in general, Chen said slowly. Zhang explained some concepts to me that were relevant to the case, but it was educational, not persuasive. I needed to understand the technical aspects to make a fair ruling. Were these conversations in your chambers? In private? Sometimes, Chen admitted, but there was nothing improper about them. Goldstein sighed. A judge having private meetings with the CEO of a company involved in a case he's presiding over? Edward, you know how that looks. Chen ran his hands through his hair. It wasn't like that. Zhang and I have been friends for 15 years. We went to law school together before he switched to tech, which makes your decision to not recuse yourself from the case even more problematic, Goldstein pointed out. Chen was silent. He had considered recusing himself when the Next Gen case was assigned to him, but he had convinced himself that he could be fair and impartial despite his friendship with Zhang. What about the money? Goldstein asked. Any idea how $200,000 in cash ended up in a safe that you say doesn't exist? Someone planted it, Chen said firmly. This is a setup. By whom? I don't know. Maybe Technodyne. Chen referred to Next Gen's main competitor, who had pushed for the antitrust case in the first place. Their CEO, Richard Watson, is close friends with Judge Hamilton, who signed the search warrant. Goldstein made another note. That's a connection worth exploring. The door opened again and a federal agent stepped in. Mr. Goldstein, Judge Chen is scheduled for arraignment in 30 minutes. We'll be ready, Goldstein said. The agent nodded and closed the door. Martin, what's going to happen? Chen asked, his voice betraying his fear for the first time. You'll appear before a judge for arraignment. They'll formally read the charges, and you'll enter a plea. Given your position and the serious nature of the charges, they'll probably ask for no bail. No bail? But I'm not a flight risk. I'll fight for bail, but be prepared, Goldstein warned. This case is already all over the news. They'll want to show they're not giving you special treatment because you're a judge. Chen thought about his wife, Barbara, who was in Europe visiting their daughter. She was probably on a plane back to San Francisco right now, confused and worried. He thought about his colleagues, his friends, everyone who had respected him. And strangely, he thought about Clint Eastwood, who had watched silently as Chen was taken away. The timing of this arrest, Chen said. At the gala, in front of everyone. It feels deliberate. Goldstein nodded. It does seem designed for maximum public impact, which supports your theory that this might be politically motivated. I made a scene with Eastwood right before they arrested me, Chen said, shaking his head. I was drunk and said terrible things to him. And then minutes later, I'm in handcuffs. The headlines write themselves. I heard about that, Goldstein said. Not your finest moment, Edward. I know, Chen admitted. I let my political views and the champagne get the better of me. I've disagreed with Eastwood's politics for years, but I shouldn't have confronted him like that. Focus on the charges for now, Goldstein advised. Your public spat with Eastwood is the least of your problems. Chen nodded, but couldn't help thinking about the actor's face as he was led away. There had been no triumph or anger in Eastwood's expression, just a kind of sad understanding, as if he had seen this story play out before. Do you think I'll go to prison? Chen asked quietly. Goldstein closed his briefcase. Not if I can help it, but this will be a tough fight, Edward. The evidence they claim to have is serious. If that money really was found in your chambers, and if those recordings exist and say what they claim, we have an uphill battle. The money was planted, Chen insisted, and the recordings must be fake or doctored. Then we'll prove that, Goldstein said. But first we need to get through the arraignment and secure your release if possible. An hour later, Chen stood before Judge Sarah Watkins, a stern woman in her 60s who had been appointed to the bench the same year as Chen. He could see no sympathy in her eyes as she looked down at him from behind the bench where he himself had sat so many times. Edward Chen, she said formally, you are charged with accepting bribes in the amount of $200,000, corruption of office, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead? Chen stood straight, trying to maintain his dignity. Not guilty, Your Honor. The federal prosecutor, a young man named James Reynolds, stepped forward. Your Honor, given the serious nature of these charges and the defendant's position as a federal judge, we ask that bail be denied. Judge Chen has extensive connections overseas and poses a significant flight risk. That's absurd, Goldstein countered. Judge Chen has deep roots in this community. His family is here. He has no criminal record and has served this court with distinction for 20 years. Judge Watkins listened to both arguments, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Bail is set at $1 million. The defendant will surrender his passport and remain within the Northern District of California. Next case. Chen felt a wave of relief. At least he wouldn't be in jail while fighting these charges. As the bailiff led him out of the courtroom, he noticed a familiar figure sitting in the back row. Clint Eastwood was watching the proceedings, his face as impassive as ever. Their eyes met briefly. Chen felt a strange urge to apologize for his behavior at the gala, but this was hardly the time or place. Eastwood gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging Chen's situation. Then Chen was led through a door, and Eastwood was gone from view. Chen wondered what had brought the actor to his arraignment. Curiosity? A desire to see Chen's downfall after being publicly insulted? Or was there something else going on that Chen didn't understand yet? As he was processed for release, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation with Eastwood and his arrest were connected somehow, though he couldn't imagine how. It seemed like a bizarre coincidence, but in Chen's experience as a judge, there were rarely true coincidences in cases like this. Something larger was at work, and Chen was determined to find out what it was. 3 days after his arrest, Judge Chen sat in the living room of his Nob Hill apartment. The place felt empty without Barbara, who was still on her flight back from Europe. The coffee table in front of him was covered with legal papers that Goldstein had left for him to review. Chen had barely slept since posting bail. His phone kept ringing with calls from reporters, which he ignored. His few attempts to check the news had been painful. His face was everywhere, usually paired with photos of Clint Eastwood. The doorbell rang. Chen checked the security monitor and saw his clerk, Jenny Wu, standing outside. He buzzed her in. Judge. Chen, Jenny said when he opened the door. She looked uncomfortable, clutching a small box of items from his chambers. Come in, Jenny, Chen said. And you can call me Edward now. I don't think I'll be a judge much longer. Don't say that, Jenny replied, stepping inside. This will all get cleared up. Chen led her to the living room. I wish I shared your confidence. Please sit down. Jenny placed the box on the coffee table. They wouldn't let me take much from your chambers. The FBI has everything sealed, but I got your personal calendar, some photos, and that Chinese tea set your mother gave you. Thank you, Chen said, genuinely touched by her loyalty. You didn't have to do this. Being associated with me right now isn't good for your career. I've been your clerk for 3 years, Jenny said firmly. I know what kind of man you are. You're not corrupt. Chen smiled sadly. I appreciate that. But the evidence they claim to have. About that, Jenny interrupted, lowering her voice even though they were alone. I need to tell you something strange. The day before your arrest, I saw people in your chambers. Chen sat up straight. What people? 2 men in maintenance uniforms. They said they were checking the heating system. I thought it was routine. Did you recognize them? Jenny shook her head. No, and they had the right ID badges. But they were in there for almost an hour, and they asked me to get them coffee so they could work without interruption. Chen's mind raced. And this was the day before they supposedly found a safe with cash in my chambers? A safe that I never installed and didn't know existed? Yes, Jenny confirmed. I mentioned it to one of the FBI agents, but he didn't seem interested. Chen reached for his phone. I need to call Goldstein right away. This could be important. As he dialed, there was another ring at the door. Are you expecting someone else? Jenny asked. Chen checked the monitor again and froze. Clint Eastwood was standing outside his door alone. It's Eastwood, Chen said, his finger hovering over the call button. Clint Eastwood? Jenny's eyes widened. Why would he be here? I have no idea, Chen admitted. He put down his phone and went to the door. When he opened it, Eastwood stood there in a simple gray jacket and dark pants. He looked older in person than he did on screen, but his posture was still straight and his eyes were clear and alert. Judge Chen, Eastwood said in his famous raspy voice. I'd like to talk to you if you have a moment. Chen was too surprised to do anything but step aside. Come in, Mr. Eastwood. Eastwood walked into the apartment, nodding politely to Jenny, who stared at him with her mouth slightly open. I should go, Jenny said quickly, gathering her purse. No, please stay, Eastwood said. What I have to say might interest you too. Chen led them back to the living room, hastily clearing some papers from a chair for Eastwood. Can I offer you something to drink? Chen asked, falling back on politeness to mask his confusion. No, thank you, Eastwood said, sitting down. I won't take much of your time. Chen sat across from him, feeling strangely nervous. The last time they had been face to face, he had been drunkenly insulting the actor in public. Mr. Eastwood, Chen began, I want to apologize for my behavior at the gala. It was unprofessional and unjustified. Eastwood waved a hand dismissively. That's not why I'm here, though I appreciate the apology. I'm here because I think you're being set up. Chen and Jenny exchanged surprised looks. What makes you think that? Chen asked carefully. I've been around a long time, Eastwood said. Seen a lot of things. The way they arrested you, right after our little scene, was too perfect. Made for the cameras. He leaned forward. So I did some digging. Called in some favors from old friends. What kind of friends? Chen asked. The kind who know things, Eastwood said simply. The kind who owe me. And they told me something interesting about Richard Watson, the CEO of Technodyne. Chen's pulse quickened. What about him? He had a private meeting with Judge Hamilton 2 weeks ago. The same Judge Hamilton who signed your search warrant. That's a conflict of interest, Jenny said. Eastwood nodded. And there's more. Watson has been pushing for a reopening of the antitrust case against NextGen. Your ruling cost his company millions in potential market share. That doesn't prove anything, Chen said, though hope was beginning to rise in him. Hamilton and Watson could have been meeting about something else. Maybe, Eastwood agreed. But what about the 2 men who were in your chambers the day before your arrest? The ones who asked your clerk here to get them coffee? Chen looked at Eastwood in shock. How do you know about that? Jenny just told me about it minutes before you arrived. Like I said, I have friends who know things, Eastwood said. Those men weren't from building maintenance. They were private contractors, hired by someone connected to Technodyne. Can you prove any of this? Chen asked. Eastwood reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. This contains security footage from the courthouse hallway, showing those men entering your chambers. It also has phone records showing calls between Watson and Hamilton in the weeks leading up to your arrest. Chen took the flash drive, staring at it. Why are you doing this? Why help me? I publicly insulted you. Eastwood's eyes narrowed in his famous squint. Because I don't like setups. Never have. In my movies, the bad guys always get what's coming to them in the end. Real life should work that way too. But how did you get this information so quickly? Jenny asked. Eastwood smiled slightly. I've played a lot of cops and detectives over the years. Made a lot of friends in law enforcement, and at my age, you learn that reputation is everything. Someone tried to use your confrontation with me as cover for framing you. I don't appreciate being used. Chen still couldn't quite believe what was happening. Mr. Eastwood, I don't know what to say. This could change everything for my case. Call your lawyer, Eastwood suggested, standing up. Show him what's on that drive, and one more thing. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a business card. This is the name of a private investigator I trust. He's already looking into who installed that safe in your chambers. I have a hunch it was put in recently. Chen took the card, reading the name. Frank Miller, Private Investigations. Thank you, Chen said, standing as well. But I still don't understand why you were at my arraignment. I had a feeling something wasn't right, Eastwood said. The timing was too perfect. And I've played enough characters on both sides of the law to know when someone's being railroaded. As they walked to the door, Chen felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time since his arrest, he had hope. Mr. Eastwood, Chen said as he opened the door, I misjudged you, not just at the gala, but for years. I let politics cloud my perception. Eastwood paused in the doorway. You know what I've learned in my career? People are rarely all good or all bad. We're all just trying to do what we think is right. He extended his hand. Good luck, Judge. I think you're going to need it. Watson and his friends won't give up easily. Chen shook his hand. Thanks to you, at least now I have a fighting chance. After Eastwood left, Chen turned to Jenny, who was still staring at the door in amazement. Did that really just happen? She asked. Did Clint Eastwood just give you evidence to clear your name? Chen looked down at the flash drive in his hand. I think he did. Call Goldstein. Tell him to come over right away, and Jenny. He paused, looking at her seriously. Thank you for standing by me. I won't forget it. As Jenny made the call, Chen sat down and carefully plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The files began to load, revealing security footage from the courthouse. Sure enough, there were the two maintenance men entering his chambers with a large toolbox. Chen watched as they checked to make sure no one was looking, then quickly closed the door behind them. For the first time since his arrest, Chen smiled. The game wasn't over yet, and thanks to an unlikely ally in Clint Eastwood, he might just have a chance to clear his name and find out who was really behind this conspiracy. 2 months later, Judge Chen sat in the courtroom, but this time he was behind the defense table instead of on the bench. The trial had been going on for 6 days. The prosecution had presented their evidence, the cash found in the safe, recordings of conversations between Chen and Michael Jiang, and financial records showing offshore transfers that lined up with key dates in the next-gen case. But now it was the defense's turn. Martin Goldstein stood before the jury, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his confidence filling the room. The prosecution wants you to believe that Judge Edward Chen, after 20 years of spotless service on the federal bench, suddenly decided to take bribes, Goldstein said to the jury. They want you to believe that a judge who has ruled against corporations just as often as he's ruled for them was corrupted in this one case. But what they don't want you to see is the evidence of a conspiracy to frame Judge Chen. Chen glanced across the courtroom where Richard Watson, CEO of Technodyne, sat watching the proceedings with a tight expression. Watson had been subpoenaed to appear after Goldstein had presented the evidence from Clint Eastwood to the judge overseeing the case. I call our next witness, Goldstein announced. Mr. Clint Eastwood. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Eastwood walked in. Despite his age, he moved with purpose. He was dressed in a dark suit and tie, looking more like one of the serious characters he had played than the casual man who had appeared at Chen's apartment 2 months ago. After Eastwood was sworn in, Goldstein began his questions. Mr. Eastwood, could you tell the court how you became involved in this case? Eastwood leaned slightly toward the microphone. After Judge Chen was arrested at the charity gala, something didn't feel right to me. The timing was too perfect, right after he and I had a public disagreement. It felt staged. What did you do about these concerns? I contacted some friends I've made over the years, former police officers, security experts, people who know how to find information. I asked them to look into the circumstances of Judge Chen's arrest. And what did they discover? They found that the two men who entered Judge Chen's chambers the day before his arrest were not courthouse maintenance workers. They were private contractors with connections to a security firm often used by Technodyne Corporation. Watson shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Eastwood continued. My investigators also uncovered phone records showing multiple calls between Richard Watson and Judge William Hamilton in the weeks leading up to the search warrant being issued. Goldstein walked to the evidence table and picked up a folder. Your Honor, we've already entered these phone records as Defense Exhibit 27. The judge nodded, and Goldstein continued questioning Eastwood. Mr. Eastwood, did your investigators look into the safe that was supposedly found in Judge Chen's chambers? Yes, Eastwood replied. The safe was installed less than 48 hours before it was discovered by the FBI. We found the purchase record and installation order. It was bought with cash by one of the same contractors who posed as maintenance workers. Chen watched the jury as they listened to Eastwood. Several were nodding, clearly impressed by the famous actor's testimony and the evidence he had helped uncover. After Eastwood finished testifying, Goldstein called his final witness, Frank Miller, the private investigator Eastwood had recommended. Miller, a tough-looking man in his 50s with short gray hair, took the stand. He explained how he had traced the $200,000 found in Chen's chambers back to a Technodyne corporate account. The money was withdrawn in cash by a Technodyne executive named Paul Winters, Miller testified. Winters is Richard Watson's brother-in-law and heads their security division. And what about the recordings of Judge Chen and Michael Zhang? Goldstein asked. They were edited, Miller said firmly. I had audio experts analyze them. Key parts of the conversations were removed to make innocent discussions about technology sound like they were discussing the case in inappropriate ways. By the time Miller finished his testimony, Richard Watson was staring at the floor, his face pale. His lawyer was whispering urgently to him. In his closing argument the next day, Goldstein summed up the defense's case. What happened to Judge Chen wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was a deliberate conspiracy to destroy him, because he made a ruling that cost Technodyne Corporation millions of dollars. Richard Watson couldn't accept losing in court, so he decided to attack the judge instead of appealing the decision through proper legal channels. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with their verdict. Not guilty on all charges. As the courtroom erupted in applause, Chen felt tears in his eyes. Barbara squeezed his hand tightly. Jenny Wu was crying openly in the row behind them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Chen, Goldstein, and Eastwood. Judge Chen, will you be returning to the bench? One reporter shouted. That decision will be up to the Judicial Review Board, Chen answered. But I look forward to the opportunity to continue serving if they'll have me. Mr. Eastwood, another reporter called out, why did you get involved in this case, especially after Judge Chen publicly criticized you? Eastwood gave his famous, slight smile. Justice matters more than personal disagreements. I've played enough characters who stood up for what's right. Sometimes life gives you a chance to do the same. As the press conference ended, Chen turned to Eastwood. I can never thank you enough, he said quietly. Without your help, I might be facing years in prison instead of possible reinstatement. Don't mention it, Eastwood replied. But there is one thing you could do for me. Anything, Chen said immediately. Have dinner with me next week. Bring your wife. I think we might find we have more in common than we thought, despite our political differences, Chen smiled. I'd like that very much. 1 week later, Richard Watson was indicted on charges of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Judge William Hamilton resigned from the bench rather than face an ethics investigation. Paul Winters agreed to testify against Watson in exchange for a reduced sentence. Chen sat in his living room watching the news report these developments. Barbara brought in 2 glasses of wine and sat beside him on the couch. What are you thinking about? She asked. How quickly life can change, Chen replied. 1 minute I'm a respected federal judge, the next I'm being led away in handcuffs. Then I'm cleared and might get my job back. And somewhere in there you became friends with Clint Eastwood. Barbara added with a smile. I still can't believe we're having dinner with him tomorrow. Chen laughed. Life is strange. I spent years disliking him because of his politics, only to discover he's a man of principle who was willing to help someone who had publicly insulted him. Maybe there's a lesson there, Barbara suggested, about not judging people too quickly based on political differences. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Maybe there is. His phone rang. It was Chief Judge Morris. Edward, Morris said when Chen answered. The Judicial Review Board has made its decision. They want you back on the bench as soon as possible. Your name has been completely cleared. Thank you, Chen said, emotion thick in his voice. I won't let the court down. After ending the call, Chen told Barbara the good news. As they celebrated, he thought about how different things might have been if he hadn't confronted Eastwood at the gala that night. If he hadn't been arrested minutes later. If Eastwood hadn't become suspicious about the timing. Sometimes the worst moments in life opened doors to unexpected friendships and second chances. Chen had lost his reputation and nearly lost his freedom, but he had gained something valuable. The understanding that people were more complex than their political views, and that justice could come from the most unlikely allies. As he raised his glass to toast with Barbara, Chen silently thanked Clint Eastwood, the man he had once insulted and who had later saved him. Tomorrow they would have dinner together not as political opponents, but as friends. In a world often divided by politics, that felt like its own kind of victory.